Welcome to Book Huddle. I'm your host, Karen Reader with Readgab. Today, our guest is author Caroline Starr Rose, and she wrote this phenomenal novel in verse. I think it is my favorite novel in verse I've ever read. It just flows so beautifully. I'm so excited to talk about it. It's about some intense adventure. But before we get into all of that, Caroline, I'm so excited to have you today. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you separate from being an author?
Yeah, I am an avid, though amateur gardener. I have, I guess, for the last 5 years been gardening, and I love it so much. I go outside maybe 3 times a day just to see if anything is different. I love to
There's so much
run.
power and excitement in seeing some. I feel like a little kid in seeing
It is,
something
it's
that
so
you put in the
joyful.
ground and watch grow.
It's just, it's delightful. It's delightful. And it's so fun to go out there and pick something, and that can be part of my lunch. And it's just really satisfying.
Fun.
I also love to run. I'm not fast, but I've been doing it for 22 years now, and it's just a regular part of my life, and it's something I really enjoy. And my last fact would be when I was 15, I was an exchange student in Adelaide, South Australia. And that was an amazingly formative experience for me. And I'm still in touch with my host family to this day.
Neat. I was reading about that and I thought that was so cool. And saw you meeting your kangaroo and yeah.
Yes.
That sounds like amazing adventures. You have just this phenomenal past that you should just write some books about that, having lived in Saudi Arabia as well, and
Yeah.
it's incredible. So I love to do an author icebreaker. We are going to do Matilda.
Okay.
So in Matilda, the boy Bruce, he is being punished by having to eat the chocolate cake because he ate some and he is in trouble. And so what would just be the ideal punishment that you have to eat and eat? What would you just love to eat?
I would say anything involving peanut butter. I'm a huge peanut butter fan, and there's really no wrong way to enjoy peanut butter. So there could
Nice.
be a variety of punishments, I suppose.
Right? You could try it in all of its forms. It's always fun to hear different because I always assume that everybody it's going to be the cookies and desserts and stuff, but it's fun to hear. J.A. White said hummus, and so it's just so fun to
Ooh.
hear people's different little things that they just love. It's so fantastic. All right, so tell us a little bit about what the burning season's about.
The Burning Season is a verse novel, my first contemporary verse novel, and it's set in New Mexico, which is my beloved home. So this feels really meaningful to me. It's set in the Gila Wilderness, which is a designated area where motorized vehicles aren't allowed. People cannot live there permanently. Really, there can be no big human change to the environment. And this is the
There needs to be
first,
a big imprint.
uh, yes, no human footprint. And this is the first designated wilderness area in the world, which is
Hmm,
pretty exciting.
I didn't know
And the
that.
Gila is inside a 3.3 million acre Gila National Forest, which is, I think, a little bigger than Connecticut. So just to keep kind of a sense of size here, our protagonist is Opal. She's excuse me, she's just turned 12 and she lives in a fire tower, which nobody lives in a fire tower year round, but in my book, I can do as I please. And
That's
so that
right.
that's Opal's life. And for readers who aren't familiar with fire towers, they are structures that were built originally in after a terrible fire in 1910 burned over 3 million acres. And thousands of these went up all over the country as a way for communities to see fires in early stages and then put them out.
Wow.
There are a couple hundred towers still standing across the country, and a handful of those are still being used as lookouts today, mainly in the Rocky Mountain region, where there are remote, densely forested areas that are not easy to get to. And so Opal, back to Opal, on her 12th birthday, she is going to train to be, or begin her training to be the fourth generation female lookout in her family. And she's really proud of this heritage. She loves her home on the top of Wolf Mountain, but she is deathly afraid of fire. She's never admitted this to her family.
Right.
Her father was a smoke jumper and he died in a fire before she was even born. And she has had some encounter with fire as well, simply because of her circumstance. And so she has this secret and she's conflicted. And she also just really wants to go to school in town
Right.
with her friends. She doesn't get to see people very often at all, being remote as she is. And she wants access to the library and after school clubs and a science lab, all the things that kids really have access to and probably take for granted.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Yes, that they're
Yeah.
like, but yeah, she's just dying for some of that interaction and those unique living situations to her that are everyday
Yes.
for other people.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, I love it so much. And just as you were talking about it, I got goosebumps again. Like I'm just like, oh,
Oh,
I just love it. It's so
thank you.
fantastic. And I love the way, even though in the last few months I've talked about fears, and that is a big thing in middle grade is to talk about fears, but we're going to jump into it again because it's so unique in this story. And I feel like novels in verse are kind of unique. So before we get into that subject, let's talk about this. So you've written other novels in verse then?
Yes. Yes.
So
I've written two others.
how did you get into this, writing novels in verse? Have you always loved poetry?
Well, I kind of stumbled into it.
Okay.
I will say when I was first writing, I did tons of research about how to write, how to be published. And one of the kind of rules of thumb I remember reading was that you should read at least 100 books in your genre or form
Right.
before attempting to write that way. And I was writing historical fiction, and I pretty much had covered that 100 book base.
You're like, good. That
I'm set. And so my first book is called Maybe. It is a verse novel on the Kansas frontier, 1870s. And I like to call it Laura Ingalls Wilder meets Hatchet. So it's a survival story with a young pioneer girl. And as I started writing after I'd done my research, I was really frustrated because I felt like the ideas in my head and what I was putting on the page, there was this real distance between everything. And so I set my work aside. I went back to my research, and what I noticed, I went back to a book called Keep This Only to Yourself: The Private Writings of Midwestern Women.
oh,
And it was like a collection of journal entries and letters and these sorts of things. And I could see this really spare and careful way they were communicating with themselves and with others. And I felt like I had found buried treasure because I thought if I could mimic the voices of these women, this will give me an access to this setting, kind of this spare, harsh, uh, isolated
yeah.
setting. It will give me a way into this character's world, her voice. I mean, that gives me goosebumps to this day, thinking about I have found the hidden secret, and now
Yes.
I can start writing. So I had read two verse novels,
Hmm.
and so I didn't let myself think I was writing verse because that was way too intimidating because I had no idea.
Right.
I knew nothing. But I remember a couple of weeks into this, I was talking to my mom and she said, "What are you working on right now?" And I said, "Well, I don't know how to describe it, but it's the most honest thing I've ever written." It just felt
Neat.
real and alive, and it was the verse that made it that way.
That is so neat. Yeah, certain things just I don't know, it just lends so well to it. And there's
Yeah.
so much in the burning season. It's intense, right? Because fire and fleeing fire and gotta get away. And so there's intense adventure and emotion. And I thought especially certain verses, I guess. I was going to say chapters, but they're verses. Certain verses, I was just like, wow, the way this flows is just what you think of when you think of poetry, just the beauty
Yeah.
and the flow. And it was just like, oh my gosh. And so every now and then I would just pause and I'd start reading out loud because I was just
Oh,
enjoying the verse so much. It was beautiful. And I think that so much novels in verse convey a different level of emotion and not
yes.
necessarily, that I don't still love prose. I read so many books, but I have read more. Last year I read a single novel in verse, and the year before probably one as well. I think the year before was the first time I read a crossover. But I read Unsinkable
Mhm.
Can last year, and I was like, I need to read more. So I've read a good handful so far, and I'm really enjoying it. I think it's nice too that it's so quick and the emotion's
Yes.
there and the story's there, and you get this connection to the character in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. It's just
Yeah.
beautiful. I appreciate all the work that you put into that because it sounds overwhelming.
Well, as I tell myself, because it can be a lot, but I appreciate the fact that I get 4 or 5 years to finally get it right. So I don't have to have it all figured out at once.
Yes, right? The beauty of editing. So,
Yes.
right. All right. So, let's get into the themes of the book.
Okay.
I love the theme of home and then also wanting to venture away from home, and why do people leave home and why do people come back? So let's talk about this and that both can be good things because
Yeah.
sometimes it's like running away from home is almost the reason that people leave home, but it doesn't need to be that.
Yeah. So how can they both be good things? Yeah, I think both are a way to discover ourselves. I have two boys, one or they're not boys, but they're still boys.
They're your boys.
My boys. One just graduated on Sunday from college, and the other is in grad school in Germany.
Nice.
So, you leave home and you learn things about yourself. I'm thinking of my time as an exchange student. 15 is pretty young to leave home, but I ha had so much respect for my parents when my kids hit 15 to realize they sent me away for 10 and a half months to the other side of the world
Right? Another
before.
country. Wow.
Yeah, we talked on the phone just a few times because there was a real emphasis on, we wrote letters. They wanted us to really bond with our families
Right.
and with this new culture. And so to not kind of have this tie that would not let us really get involved in a new
Right. Or like
setting.
that dependency. Right.
Exactly, exactly. And I don't think that really is possible in this day and age. I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad. It's a
It
different if
is
you
what
were
it
an
is.
exchange
Yeah.
student now. It would be different. And I learned things about myself I had no idea about. I learned things about my country I had no sense of before, about my family. And then coming back home, I learned things about myself that I didn't know. So I feel like the coming and the going, sometimes it is like I'm gonna go and I'm gonna figure
Right.
out myself and I am beyond this place. But I think equally returning to a place is a really eye-opening experience too,
Yeah.
because it's a little bit like picking up a book for a second or third time. We have grown, but coming back to the familiar, that's when we see the growth. Oh, I didn't notice this before, or this was the thing I just thought was so uninteresting before, but now I really appreciate it. So home can be a really complicated thing, and I think sometimes we have a complicated relationship with it.
Right. And that's okay. That's it can be
Yeah,
good and bad
exactly.
and just take both and let it develop
Exactly.
what you are. Right.
Exactly.
And so, like, part of developing what you are, and Opal has so much of this, is that she has dreams and ambitions. And it feels like reading it that she felt like they couldn't overlap. I
Hmm.
don't know. At one point, anyways, that she was like, I want to do this and I want to go this direction. And I've really got these dreams that are going to help me progress and just become who I want to be. But I love the family and the heritage of this lookout. And so it feels like there's conflicting of going forward
Absolutely.
because of that.
Yeah, I think there are a few poems where she says, I long to go, I need to stay. I mean, some of these things are not her choice because her mother has decided you're not old enough yet to go to school in town. I want you here for 2 more years,
Yes, you're my
and
child. I birthed you. I want to raise
exactly,
you.
you're 12 years old and you're staying here for 2 more years. So
Yes.
we'll reconsider when high school starts. But
Right.
yes, it's hard. She is, like I said, she's really proud of this family or her family heritage. She loves the wilderness
Yes.
and the sense of caring for the land. Um, but she's not sure she's up to the job,
Right.
especially because of her fears.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So there
Yeah.
are a lot of, and I feel like that's life, isn't it? I mean, there are so many layers of how we make sense of the world and make sense of ourselves. And no decision is ever cut and dry. No decision really, nothing is ever really one thing. And that's one of the things I've been trying to say in this book, that using the example of fire, I mean, I think it's really easy for us, especially those of us who live in cities,
right?
fire as only an awful thing. And please don't get me wrong, fire is destructive. Fire is life-changing. Fire can be absolutely horrible.
Right.
But fire is also a natural part of regeneration within forests. It renews soil. There are some plants that need fire in order for seeds to germinate.
Right.
So it's one of these really tricky things.
And I had never known that until I read this, that like the ash on the ground, because I think of the ash on the ground being destruction and now things can't grow and push through it. And I was like, oh, that's a good thing. And like for some areas to have
Yeah,
the ash on the
nitrogen and
ground.
phosphorus, I believe, are in the ash, which then, is something that helps plants to grow.
Yeah, that's incredible. And yeah, definitely some analogies there with ourselves that something that we think is so destructive to us can help us grow and be stronger. And whether it was completely bad, like a fire that destroyed a forest in a way that seemed just, or destroyed a town. Let's use the town. That it destroyed a town, whether it's completely bad, there can be healing, whatever caused us something to cause us to feel like there's a layer of ash, we can grow through it. Or
Right.
it can also just be necessary. We need that fire, those challenges to have growth,
Yeah.
to be better
Yeah.
people. Yeah. I love that so much. So let's talk about fears though, because she's got to face it up. If she wants to continue on that path that she would love to be on, she's really in a position that she is going to have to face and acknowledge her fear. Before we talk about facing it, let's talk about the power of acknowledging a fear. Just
Yes.
saying,
So Opal has not spoken of this fear that she's had for years. When she was 8, there was a fire that came very close to her tower, and her tower had to be evacuated. She and her mom and grandmother had, literally started running down the mountain until a helicopter swoops in and takes them away. And, this has deeply impacted her sense of safety and security, and, I'm sure has stirred up in her memories of this father she's never known and yet she lost because of fire. And she doesn't discuss this with her mom and her grandmother. And
or her friends. Like she
don't,
thinks it's so hidden from everybody she interacts with. And she
yes,
does have
she
these
does.
friends that she sees a few times a year on a consistent basis that she maintains
Yes.
friendships.
But she finds out, one of her friends says to her, hey, I noticed when we roast marshmallows, you don't get really close to the fire. The time the log rolled and some sparks flew up, you scooted away. And he basically says it's okay if you're afraid. And she's kind of like, "Well, I don't want to talk about that."
Yeah,
But
yeah,
she realizes, okay, well, at some point she confesses to her grandmother, look, I'm afraid. Have you ever been afraid living out here? Because I'm scared of fire. And it's her grandmother says something along the lines that getting a fear out in the open, it helps it lose its power or something like that. And so,
yes,
that whole idea of light shining in darkness, the darkness is no longer so dark if you can let a little bit of light in. And so I think speaking something out loud gives the fear, lessens the power of
right.
the fear. It lets a little bit of light into the scary thing, and it lets someone else carry some of the worry for you.
Yes, we need each other. And so,
Exactly.
yes, don't worry about being judged. Those
Yeah.
people who love you, they're going to love you regardless of your fear. And when it comes right down to it, we all have fears. Like we
Yeah.
feel so alone. And it was probably embarrassing for her. Like it's like I am supposed to, be a fire watcher. What is the term? Is it
Look out.
lookout? I'm supposed to be a lookout. And I'm terrified of fire. Like I'm sure that a lot of fears are embarrassing for
Yeah.
people. But if we can't talk about it, the first step to acknowledge, can we really face it? And if we are going to face it, solo is not the way to go.
Yeah. Exactly. It's interesting. I have this quote that I love. It's by a man named Friedrich Buechner. And I kind of it has informed every novel I've written, whether I've realized it or not. And it goes like this. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. And I feel like, isn't that life?
I love it.
Isn't that life? Beautiful things are going to happen here.
Yes,
Terrible things are going to happen here.
absolutely. And sometimes they can be
And
the same thing.
sometimes it's the same thing. Sometimes it's fire, which is beautiful and terrible.
Yes.
And then, to think how in the midst of this uncertainty do we not be afraid? I'm someone who generally is a pretty fearful person, and so that quote has encouraged me, and it just informs my writing because I feel like it just speaks to the truth of being human.
Right. Yes, I've definitely become more fearful as an adult and more so as a mother because
Mm,
there are these things that are so precious to me that I'm in charge of now that I
right.
always see like these possible what ifs that could happen. And my husband's like, "Oh my gosh, just stop." Because I'm always trying to like see the future of every possible anything so I can prevent it.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah. So, all right. So, let's talk about facing our fears. I feel like she was getting ready. She was working her way up to it, Opal. But then, Caroline, what happens if we aren't ready to face our fears? What do you feel that she probably didn't think she was ready, right?
Yeah, I think in a lot of situations we're forced. Our hand is forced. Ready or not, here I come sort of
Right.
thing.
Right.
You're suddenly having to stare it in the face. And that's the thing about writing. I like to tell kids that authors are mean and nasty people. And what I mean by that
You
is
sound like girl doll right there.
um, you can't give your character what they want, at
Right.
least not straight away, and you have to have them face their fears and their weaknesses because that's how we grow and change. We were talking
Yes.
about growth and change. And so, early on knowing that she's afraid of fire, I'm basically saying someday Opal will have to face
Yes.
fire, and how will
Right.
she contend with it?
Yeah, like this is no spoiler. You know this is leading up to it the whole
Yes.
time. Yes.
Yes. I think she's as ready as she can
Oh,
be.
right.
And I think we find reserves in ourselves we don't realize are there until we need to call on them.
Yes.
And
Right.
that's why I love survival stories. I feel like I love to read them from the comfort of my toasty living room on my comfortable
Yes, a
couch.
safe place. Be afraid of
Exactly.
a
And they're
safe
so
place.
courageous and inspiring. And it's nice in my comfortable life to watch people face insurmountable things and come through it. It's inspiring and it's encouraging that perhaps I can face my everyday experiences and come through too.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, that was beautiful. So the Hatchet, is there a sequel? There's more? I did not know that until reading it.
There are a half a dozen, I think.
Are there
Oh
really?
my
Because the Hatchet's
gosh.
just the one. I have one copy, right here on my shelf, but I didn't know there was a whole shebang. And it's
Yes.
always him. What's his name?
Brian Robeson.
Ryan.
Yes.
It's always
Yeah.
him, just continuing situation.
Yes.
Wow.
So I have to confess, I've read the whole series except book number two, which I've heard a lot of people say you can skip book number two. It doesn't
Okay.
matter because book number three is the one I mentioned in The Burning Seas of
Okay.
Brian's, which is an alternate, basically without giving the end of Hatchet away. Book number two supposes if this happened at the end of Hatchet, the story goes this direction.
Okay.
Book number three, called Brian's Winter. This is just, I love this. Kids wrote to Gary Paulsen saying,
Yes.
what if instead of Hatchet ending like this, it ended like that? And so he took the story in this different direction. It really is a choose your own adventure. I love it.
That's so
So these
cool.
two alternate, oh, that gives me goosebumps. I love it. And
Oh,
I love that the author, that he chose to listen to these kids and responded and thought up an entirely new experience for Brian. I remember this book came out when my first year teaching.
right.
I was teaching seventh grade, and I just devoured this book. And I cried at the end because I thought, oh no, there are no more stories about Brian. But thankfully, there ended up being more. I just was so involved with it. And I felt like there could be parallels with Opal's story and with Brian's story. And so
Oh, yeah.
that's why I brought it in.
Yeah, I love that. I could have looked that up myself, I suppose. But yes, I had to be like, that's not something she just did because she can do what you want when you're writing, right? So I loved that you went there and took these analogies because Hatchet, it's just timeless, right?
It is
And
such a good
so,
book. I
yes,
love it.
yes. Oh, it's so beautiful. All right, so tell me something that you yourself learned in writing this book.
Wow, every book I learned so many things about writing, about the world. In this particular book, I learned that significant role that fire plays. I think I knew a little bit like that there are some grasses that land needs to burn in order for some grass to grow.
Yeah, and I
But
did know that it's, a normal part of that some fires are supposed to be left and
yeah, but I guess I didn't realize the depth to how necessary fire is to the natural world. And without it, it can irreparably change ecosystems. It's an important part of nature.
yeah.
Think of what else. I didn't know much of anything about these fire towers, and so that was thrilling to learn
That
about.
was so cool. So did you go and read like real life accounts? Do have people journaled? I'm assuming people are just sitting there, gotta do something with their
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Like, you know what I mean? It sounds so terrible. Like, obviously, people have lived out, alone or moved from society for years. But I
yeah.
think journal is definitely a powerful use of time and to have
Well,
the
and even poetry, Jack Kerouac, he was a lookout for a time. So there are kind of poetry and lookout connections, which is really fun since I
neat.
wrote this as verse. I read a great book for adults who are looking to find out more about fire towers. There's a book called Fire Season Notes from a Fire Lookout, something like that, by
Oh,
Philip
cool.
Connors, his name. I loved that book, and it was set in the Gila, and that kind of inspired me to set the story there. And what's really fun in 2022, I hiked down, well, I drove, first I drove down, and then
Yes.
I hiked in the Gila Wilderness, and I hiked up to Signal Peak Tower, which is one of the towers in the book.
Cool.
And the lookout gave me a tour, which was wonderful. But he happened to also be on the radio, and he was talking to Philip Connor, the man whose book I'd read. And I was
Oh,
just like, that is so
cool.
exciting. So it was really, really fun.
That is really neat. I love that you went and experienced it in your,
Yes, it was so amazing to see, because I'd been imagining this and
right.
I'd seen videos online and photographs, but to actually be there and
Yes.
experience it was really important.
Oh, so cool. So cool. What do you hope for Opal going forward in her life? Because, characters become so real. Is there
They
something you
do.
hope for Opal?
Yeah, I hope she continues to be brave when she might not realize she is brave, but in facing big and small decisions and experiences in front of her. And I mean, I have no doubt that she is going to. I think there are many ways we can live our lives. I think that's another thing too, that we sometimes think like life is this long, straight line and we can't deviate from the line and we must do things step by step by step. There are so many different opportunities, and maybe sometimes you have to backtrack a little bit. But I think she can love her home and she can long to go to school in town. And I think both of those things, she can hold those equally as
Yes.
important to her.
Yes. Beautiful. Yeah. Think of life as a plane instead of a line, I think is an
Nice.
important thing that we shouldn't view that we have to keep traveling one direction.
Yes.
So, can you tell us anything that's next, up and coming?
My next book is coming out next summer,
Yes.
and it is called Books Up the Mountain, and it's about the packhorse librarians of Eastern Kentucky during the Great Depression.
So cool.
And imagine a mobile library, what do we call that? A bookmobile, but instead
Yes,
of
right?
a truck or a van or a bus, imagine the library coming via horseback to people in remote areas.
So cool.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I mean, I think, first of all, I think the library is just such a noble thing that
Yeah,
anybody can walk in and borrow a book for free.
right.
And then the fact that librarians are loving their communities by bringing, hand delivering books to people who had never had library service before.
So
What
cool.
is more beautiful than that?
Right?
Just-
Oh,
It's so noble. I have no other word for it. It's so
right.
noble.
Yes.
And then in 2027, I have another verse novel coming out. And this is the first time I've written from an animal's perspective.
Oh.
And this is called Song of the Raven.
Neat, neat.
Yes.
I would have thought, which is funny because I love fantasy, but as I was getting into trying to spread out what I read, I think I would have thought animals were cheesy if I had thought about it doing perspective. But as I was reading the book, like, oh, my favorite is Operation Happy. Have you read that by Jenny Walsh? That it goes
I
alternates
haven't, but I
between.
interviewed Jamie on my blog last year. So yes, I'm familiar with her book. Yeah.
Yeah, so it goes alternating perspectives with the girl and the dog. And that was just every time I'd be like, oh, it's the dog again. Yes.
Oh, I love it.
Yes, I love it so much. Can you share a favorite book, a favorite children's book that you can recommend for our audience?
Yes, and I'm hoping I'm getting this title right. The 10 Mistakes of Hank Hooperman, or The 10th Mistake of Hank Hooperman
Yes.
by Jennifer Chaldenko.
Yes.
Uh, this came out last year. I think I read it in November or December, and I was just blown away
It is so
by
good.
this book. It was funny. It was heartrending. It was
Yes.
honest. It's
Right.
about a boy named Hank who's a middle schooler, and it opens where he and his little sister, she's 3, I think, they haven't seen their mom for a week. And they are, like looking for coins. Hank's trying to make it a game, so his
Yes.
little sister Boo isn't afraid, looking for coins in the couch so that they can go to the 7-Eleven to buy food. And Hank's not sure what he's supposed to do.
Right. I know
Um,
about
he does remember when his mom, I think, filled out a form for school that there was an emergency contact. He had no idea who this person is, but he's able to find the person's name and number, and he shows up on her front doorstep with his little sister, and she reluctantly takes them in.
because she's like, wait, why was I even the emergency contact?
Yeah,
Right? She's just like,
exactly.
well, she's like, she remembers, but she's like, she remembers the lady, his mom, but she's like, I do not even know why she chose me.
Yes. And this woman runs a daycare in her home. And so she loves little children. She loves Boo, but she makes it pretty clear, Hank, yeah, I guess you can
Teeny
stay
boys,
here.
no
But
thanks.
yeah. And what I love about it is it's just really it's gentle, but it's really honest about loving an adult who is not reliable
Yeah.
and kind of all that comes with that. Because the
Oh,
rest of the story, Hank is looking for his mother and he's
yes.
convinced he can put it all back together for them.
Right.
And what's beautiful is there are adults of varying degrees of support in this
Yeah.
book. And it's beautiful when there are adults that are able to support him, not beyond saying, making promises that they can't keep. So I found it really honest and tender, and it was just profound. I found it to be a really profound book.
Oh yeah, it's so beautiful. And I almost love that. I mean, I hate that I do, but I almost love gosh, the girl that the lady, the daycare work owner
Yes,
that they go
yes,
to, that she is so, standoffish towards him, and she has her reasons.
yeah,
And it's just because it would have been so easy to write the story about just this loving, opens her arms and is going to make everything all better. And she does bring him in, but it's not this perfect, happy throughout that she just
yeah,
takes care of everything for him.
exactly,
And
exactly.
yeah, it's a beautiful book. I love it. That's a great
Yeah,
one.
thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much, Caroline, for being on with us today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for your interest and for this opportunity.
Yes.